Hi guys, it's Ben Heacox here with The Vindicator online on our YouTube channel. Today we've got with us two special guests here. We have Audra from the Young Americans for Liberty here on campus at Cleveland State, and we also have Jack from the Student Socialist Society. And we've got two kind of differing viewpoints here. Audra kind of represents more of a right libertarian kind of a view, and Jack is over here from a socialist viewpoint for students on campus. And we just wanted to kind of do a dialogue about what those two viewpoints mean for students, and then just the viewpoints in general, what they stand for. So first of all, guys, I just want to ask you, what would you say you stand for as your organizations on campus? We'll start with Audra.
Well, Young Americans for Liberty takes the stance of individual liberty, and that individuals are born with natural rights that include their life, their liberty, and their property or happiness, and that the government should play a minimal role in that aspect.
I would say the core of what socialism is the belief that capitalism is inherently exploitative due to a system of private ownership of the means of production. So what we want to do is shift ownership to the workers so that essentially we create democratic control of the economy.
We're talking more of a more control economy and more of like a free property, individual ownership economy here. Kind of a different viewpoint between the two of you is what I'm gathering. Would you say that's right?
I wouldn't describe socialism as a control economy, at least not necessarily. Some socialists take that stance. Personally, I'm a libertarian socialist, which I know sounds kind of confusing. But I believe that the state is a creation of the capitalist class and that it serves the interests of the capitalist class. So we want to remove the state, essentially, and create a much more direct democracy type of government. So I would say, and most socialists take the stance that generally you want less government. And any socialist who takes the stance of a command economy would view it as a step to eventually reducing government.
Now, would you agree with that statement?
I think in America today we kind of have a pseudo-capitalist economy in that the government puts a lot of regulations within businesses that in a truly free market economy, businesses should have the power to be entrepreneurs and try to bring forth change with different technology and so I agree in the aspect that the government shouldn't get involved within the economy, and that the more regulations you put within the economy, the less freedom individuals have to flourish within it.
So what would you guys say the difference between like the economic standpoint and then also if we go from economics to more of a political ideological difference? What would you say would be your ideology about how people should be governed?
Well, I would say that I would make the argument that you can't really separate economy and politics, that they're very much directly intertwined. So I guess what I would say is that I believe, just as we believe in America today, at least nominally in democracy, I think we should extend that to the economy because you can't separate the economy and politics. As you can see today with just the way our world operates, is that money and politics are inseparable. So by acknowledging that they are in many ways one and the same, then we should recognize that if we want to create true democracy, we need to spread that to the economy. And the means to do that is essentially to abolish private property as a means of making money and for generating power, and shift that property into common ownership. And the way people would govern themselves would be, there could be many ways, but generally it would involve a much more direct democracy on a smaller scale, and then maybe larger scale councils managing transactions between different groups. There's many ways that the specifics of it could work. The core is the ending private property and shifting things into common ownership.
Now, he was talking about the abolition of private property being a way to a more direct democracy. How would you respond to that? As you said, you kind of stand for private property as an organization, as even your personal beliefs.
Well, I think that it's really hard to get a group of people together to agree on anything, and when it comes to like a common purpose, I don't think human beings can really say like come to like an agreement like this is the way like property should be owned within a community. I think individualism will play a factor in that.
So I would say that capitalism actually, in a lot of ways, is a much more collectivist ideology than socialism. The reason for that is because in order to justify the way the economy works, the way we look at the GDP as a measurement of success, we have to ignore distribution and just look at the whole and say, the whole has more money. So don't pay attention to the way it's distributed, who has what. All that matters is that society as a whole has more money, and there are economic exchanges happening. And that's sort of the collectivist ideology that backs capitalism. And I would say that a true individualism would be a much more direct democracy because it gives everyone a say. Because you can't create a world where everyone is truly operating without contact with everyone else. So you have to make these compromises and say the best we can do is agree as best we can.
Right now, our president is talking about middle-class economics in general. Would you say that that is in line somewhat with socialist views, or is it just a different thing entirely?
So I would say that the entire concept of the middle class is this sort of construct by the ruling capitalist class. And that essentially there's really only two classes in society. There's the class that owns private property and extracts value from workers, and there's the working class. So this middle class is kind of an illusion to create this idea that people are doing better than they are to keep them more satisfied and willing to stay in place. So I would say when he's talking about middle class economics, essentially he's putting up the smokescreen to distract people from the real inequality in our society.
Is there a way to make society more equal, or is it inherently less equal?
I think that when the government plays a role within society, a lot of times they create divisions within it, and a lot of times it divides people into classes, and when it does that, it breeds inequality within society. And I think no matter where a person comes from, that they have the opportunity to get a good education, to better themselves, and when the government gets involved with that, they try to divide people.
And one of the common critiques of socialism I know is that it people think that it's going to make everyone the same. And that's almost, maybe that's the idea, but there are people who would say that we're not all the same and that we need to be that we need to have differential have people who are in different classes and who are different who can get ahead in life. What would your response be to them that socialism is negatively creating, like, hurting diversity, hurting the advancement of society?
Well, I think you can pretty clearly say that capitalism does not encourage diversity. You look at our society and the way the entire system is set up to require us to work these jobs where we sell our labor to somebody else. And it creates this very conformist society where in order to fit in, you have to wear a suit and a tie, you have to go work for somebody for 60 hours a week, realistically, for what it actually is for most people. And your individuality is drained by this. And that, of course, it forces you into this consumerism, which is not the root cause, the root problem in capitalism, but is a huge issue within capitalism. And I would say capitalism drains individuality much more than anything else. And that what socialism encourages is by no longer forcing you to sell your labor to somebody else so that they can extract wealth from you, you have more freedom to pursue whatever you need to do. Because we eliminate this phenomenon of these bullshit jobs that essentially contribute nothing to society except to make somebody rich. So there's so much less working hours necessary, because most working hours today aren't necessary, that people simply have much more free time and are better able to be their own individual.
So could either of you give some historical context to where like a socialist society may have worked, or historical context to where a libertarian society has been more successful?
Sure, absolutely. There have been a few successful socialist societies. A lot of people look at the USSR and communist China as like examples of how socialism doesn't work, right? But in reality, those were never really actual functioning socialist societies. Well, okay, I would say the USSR, for a very brief period after the revolution, was truly socialist. But due to outside imperialism and internal corruption, they became these sort of deformed workers' states, which for a very large number of reasons were not socialist. The primary being workers did not own the means of production. As for actual functioning socialist societies, you can look at, historically, there was the Paris Commune, there was anarchist Catalonia, there was Free Ukraine. Right now, there are the Zapatistas the Zapatistas in Mexico, and the Naxalites in India. All of these are these sort of revolutionary anarchist groups. But I would also make the argument that it's hard to have a proper socialism because what socialism inevitably faces, hard to have a proper socialism with capitalism, because what socialism inevitably faces in a capitalist world is outside imperialism. You look at, in South America, whenever, historically, over the past 100 years, people would democratically elect a far-left president, the United States would execute them and have them assassinated and overthrow the government and put in these fascist dictator coups to replace them, because they find that those are threats to the established power. So the only way socialism can truly be achieved is on a global scale. Anything else can work on a small scale, but it's constantly facing external pressure to collapse so that the ideology does not spread and overthrow capitalism, essentially.
And historically, what are some successful societies that hold true to like libertarian ideals?
Well, although the American founding was imperfect and there were things that were immoral, in my opinion, I think that America is an example for libertarian principles of limited government, justice under the law, and personal freedom. So I think you don't have to look further than this country, and I think it's rooted in the principles that make this country great. So.
Do you think that socialism could violate some of the principles she's talking about, like personal liberties, the sanctity of life, and that kind of thing? Is there a way that socialism would violate those principles?
Oh, I would make the argument that capitalism constantly, inherently violates those principles. You look at the world today, and realistically, we have a global system. Capitalism is not this thing in individual countries. The entire world is part of this capitalist system. And the vast majority of the world is in terrible poverty, despite the ability for us to distribute resources to everyone. The reason for that is the capitalist class hoarding wealth. And you can make the argument, I have heard people make the argument that what we don't have today is a proper capitalism because governments get involved. But in reality, the state was established because it was established by the capitalist class in order to maintain the class contradictions inherent in capitalism. The state's purpose is to provide just enough regulation and just enough to sate the workers so that they don't overthrow the capitalist class. And it's also to keep them from overthrowing the capitalist class. Like if you look at the police were founded explicitly to break strikes in the U.S. That was their historical purpose. It was to stop workers from standing up against capitalists. So I would say that in order for capitalism to function, you have to go to work and work for somebody, and you create value by your labor. And then they take that value and they steal most of it for their own wealth, even though all they have to do is own land or business or factory or whatever it is. So capitalism cannot possibly fulfill those values. Socialism fulfills them by liberating people from this need to be a wage slave to somebody else, to sell your labor and to sell your time and in a lot of ways sell your dignity, because you have to go to work and you have to pretend you like it, and then somebody makes money off of you while you are struggling, you're in poverty. Lots of people are working 2 jobs and trying to go to school so they can make more money, and then school puts people into debt. I mean, all you need to do is look at the world today to see that capitalism denies the vast majority of people their fundamental human rights. And socialism would ensure them by removing the permanent upper class and creating a classless society.
Now, there are people who have historically argued that socialism, if it is allowed to become like the new system of how like the world works, that it will cause like you think of dystopian novels like 1984. That's what most people associate with socialism. How would you respond, I guess, to George Orwell even, or people's general conception about socialism, that we're going to have this state where everybody is poor and that somebody is going to have to rise to the top, and it's going to be whenever someone does take control of a socialist society, it's going to make it even worse for those who aren't in control?
Well, my response to George Orwell would be to shake his hand because we pretty much agree on everything. George Orwell was a hardcore socialist. 1984 is not an anti-socialist book. It's an anti-Stalinism book. Okay. It's supposed to be an illustration of how the USSR is a corruption of the ideals of socialism. The same thing with Animal Farm. George Orwell also wrote Homage to Catalonia, which was about his time fighting for the anarchist revolutionaries in Catalonia in Spain in the 1910s. George Orwell, at least until later in his life when he went senile, was a hardcore socialist for most of his life. He said something to the effect of, everything I have written, I wrote for the cause of socialism. So I don't think I would really need to respond to George Orwell. Now, as far as I would respond to the argument that that socialism leads to people, getting in power and wielding that power over other people, well, look at capitalism. That's the way the world is today. We have these smaller, entrenched classes that rule the rest of the world essentially through their economic might. And the reason for that is capitalism actively encourages people. Capitalism actively encourages people to accrue power unto themselves and hoard it personally, usually in the form of money. And in our world, money is power. What socialism does is it gives everyone the tools to fight people who would want to accrue power. So obviously it is possible in any society for it to become corrupt. But what socialism does is it intentionally works against that. Capitalism intentionally concentrates power in small hands. So what we would do is have a system that consistently spreads power to as many people because everyone deserves to have power over their own life.
Now, what would be the advantage to having, in your opinion, private property ownership? What does that ensure for people in today's society, do you believe?
It kind of gives them the opportunity to flourish and bring about different technology advances. Like there are people that never went to college who create technology, and that would only be possible in a truly capitalist society. I would say private property, by being heritable and by being established through the process of enclosure, which is historically, private property is established by taking land held in common and an individual or a small group of individuals claiming it as their own and forcing everyone else off the land through violence. And then private property is only maintained through the threat of violence from the state. So anyone who does not have private property, which is most people, very few people own land or any serious resources that they can use to generate wealth. That the only way they can get by in our society is by selling their labor to someone who does own private property, who then passes that private property on to their children. And it creates essentially, really what we've done is we've traded kings for just another set of kings who pass their wealth on through generations and then justify it when occasionally one poor person gets rich. So private property creates and maintains inequality, literally historically by taking things held in common away and maintaining that, keeping them away from the people, so that people can't gain private property, that all they can do is labor for somebody else's benefit.
What do you think people would lose if we gave up private property for the sake of adopting a more socialist structure in the United States today?
I believe if that were to happen, you would lose your basic liberty as a human being. Property is like a part of everybody's right as an individual, and to say that you can't have your own business, I don't think the government should get involved in regulating businesses because that's their property. And so.
If property is a fundamental right, though, then for the vast majority of people, they're being denied that right.
Yeah.
Because they do not have property. So how would capitalism solve that issue of most people not having this right of having property they control?
I think that in America we have a pseudo-capitalist society. It's not a truly free market economy, and that people can make their own decisions because they have to go through so many regulations that the government puts on them. And
But, I mean, the government was founded by the capitalist class, and its main purpose is to maintain private property. Private property is only maintained because the state has monopoly on violence that they can use to keep people off private property. So, and a free market inevitably devolves into what we have today. Because you can look at, 19th century United States, and it was much, much closer to the libertarian ideal than today. And it just turned into what we have today. And that's the way it works, because if it doesn't do that, either we'll end up with this sort of neo-feudalism, or the people will revolt and overthrow the owning class because they have no power otherwise.
So what would you say to revolutions that have sparked up by people who believe that they had the right to private property? Other revolutions in countries that have been denied rights by kings, like let's say the French Revolution, or revolutions that have happened historically, were they off base? Were they revolting for the wrong thing?
No, absolutely not. So as a Marxist, I believe that in order for socialism to exist, capitalism has to exist first. So I would not say that capitalism should have never happened. And I look at, the founding fathers in some ways, for all their awful, awful qualities, as the progressives of their day. Because what they did is they moved us from feudalism to capitalism, which is a better system than feudalism. But the issue is, just because it was the best choice then, doesn't mean that it is eternally the best choice, and that we should settle with capitalism forever. And you can just look at those people and see that the founding fathers did it for largely selfish reasons, because they wanted to have their secure private property. They wanted to not have to give up any of their wealth to the king, and then they set up a system where they didn't have to give any of their wealth to anybody, really. Eventually, right, the state was established, and it became, the state did what the state does, like I said earlier. But no, those capitalist revolutions are absolutely historically necessary, but they are not the end-all, be-all of human society, and we can move past that. And today, now, is the time when our society is finally becoming ready to fully move past that.
Do you think that we should move past the capitalist society or the private property ownership into the future? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't really know what the future holds, so I can't really comment as to how society is going to change. So
now, we've talked a lot about the economic issues, and I know that you said that it's hard to separate economics from politics, but there's some issues that are happening in the United States right now. Like you mentioned, you did a video about the NSA and spying, I guess, on American people. Do you think what's your response to that? To the NSA looking through emails, having that right to do that, or supposedly listening in on phone calls, whether or not they're actually doing that, no one's actually said, but we assume. What do you think a government's role would be in monitoring its own people? Your response, and then Audra as well.
Well, I would say that, we're absolutely against everything the NSA does, essentially. We believe that the reason they do that is to sort of keep an eye on potential revolutionary actors who would essentially overthrow the current system. And that's the purpose of the NSA and the FBI as well, is to keep an eye on those sorts of people who are engaging in radical politics. And that's because they ultimately serve the capitalist class. So their goal is to maintain the status quo as best as possible. And they use all sorts of crazy duplicitous means to do that. And you can look back during the Occupy protests in Cleveland. There's a small group, I think they're now referred to as the Cleveland Five, maybe the Cleveland Four, who an FBI agent went to them, and they were just sort of these leftist protesters, peaceful protesters working with the Occupy movement. And this FBI agent sort of worked his way into their group, undercover obviously, became friends with them, and then built a bomb and told them they were going to bomb somebody, and the rest of them weren't really on board. But then he revealed he was an FBI agent and arrested them, and they are still in prison for him framing them for building a bomb. And you can look this all up. It's not like some secret conspiracy. It's pretty obviously out there, available to look up. And they're still in prison now. And actually, we're going to begin working on a lot of protests in support of them soon. But that's essentially the role of these sort of citizen spying groups, is to stop any threats to the status quo. It's not protection of the civilians. It's getting rid of anyone who would overthrow the capitalist class.
And what do you believe the existence of the NSA does, and and what they've been doing as far as infringing on people's liberties?
I definitely think the NSA program should be abolished, and I think that it does more harm than good when it comes to trying to track down potential terrorists. I don't think that the NSA program has even stopped a single terrorist attack in the United States. I think more or less it deprives people of their privacy, and I don't think it should exist.
Now, as far as you mentioned terrorists, there's a lot of terrorism in the world right now. We have to deal with groups like ISIS, Al Qaeda, the Taliban, extremist groups like that. What do you think the U.S. foreign policy should be on that kind of a threat of terrorism around the world?
I think the United States foreign policy has a history of blowback, and that when it involves itself in the affairs of other countries, it incites a lot of hatred within that country, and there's a lot of retaliation. For example, in Iran, the U.S. overthrew a democratically elected president to replace it with the president that they wanted in power. And in the process, a lot of the Iranians got angry and they revolted, and it led to the Iranian hostage crisis. So I think the U.S. has to take a step back when it comes to its foreign policy and look at what it does around the world and realize that a lot of people, it should just mind its own business and not involve itself in the affairs of other countries. So.
I think in a lot of ways she's right. These sort of radicalist, extremist terrorist groups are generally created by the United States to overthrow whatever government they want out of power. I mean, you look at ISIS, Al Qaeda, Taliban, all of these have a history of working for the United States, being supplied with weapons by the United States. And inevitably they all turn against the United States because the U.S. government and military can't stay away from its desire to plunder all other countries of their natural resources. And I think what's important about this is to look at why the United States has these policies and if it's realistic to expect the government to do anything about it. And I would say that the U.S. does this because they find a country where they have natural resources they want or labor they can extract. And what they do is they go into the country and they give them sort of these false estimates of how to build infrastructure and how much money they'll make back. And they tell them, oh, you'll make back this much money in this amount of time, but they lie and exaggerate the amounts of money. So then when those countries invest in these infrastructure developments or whatever it is, they end up being in debt because they take out loans that would be paid back on these fake estimates, but realistically will never be paid back. Then that debt is used as leverage by the United States and institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to force those countries to agree with the U.S. in UN votes and to sell land to them. Like you can look in South America, it happens to a lot of countries where they're forced to sell, in order to pay for their debt, they're forced to sell areas of rainforest off to U.S. oil companies. And then if they resist, if there's some sort of populist leader, then the U.S. has them killed. If they are unable to do that, like in the case of Saddam Hussein, who was able to avoid assassination for a long time due to using body doubles and all sorts of other crazy stuff, they send in the military and make up an excuse like weapons of mass destruction, and they overthrow the government and then establish their own puppet government, basically. What's important to note is that whole process creates this violent blowback, like she said. But the motivation for it is to establish U.S. dominance for U.S. corporations to extract wealth from these countries. It's a profit-driven policy. And that's why we can't reasonably expect the U.S. government to do anything about it, because the entire purpose of the United States government is to maintain capitalism. And the only way to solve these issues is to create a radical change in our system.
All right, guys, so tell me a little bit more about your organizations. What you guys do on campus, your meeting times, where you guys meet at. Just give us a general idea.
Well, for the Student Socialist Society, we were founded last October. What we do on campus is we engage in a lot of ideological outreach, trying to teach people what socialism really is and what we're trying to accomplish. We've engaged in a lot of protests around Cleveland, especially ones related to police brutality and racism. We have we work closely with a lot of other groups on campus, like the Student Feminist Coalition, the Student Environmental Movement, Black Student Union, Progressive Student Action, Students for Justice in Palestine. We work with them on a variety of issues. We help them, and we all help each other out. We form sort of this forum where we can all meet and talk that we call the Justice League. We have our next meeting for Student Social Society this Thursday, which is March 25th, I think. Is that correct?
26th.
March 26th, this Thursday, in MC 302 at 11:30, where we'll be talking about a lot of ideology and upcoming events we have planned, which we're also working with the adjuncts on their efforts to increase their pay, fight for basically a living wage and benefits, and we are working with the Facility and Safety Team FAST on their Earth Day event in April.
Young Americans for Liberty, the chapter at Cleveland State, was founded in the fall of 2012, and we're all about bringing awareness to students on different issues that happen in the world and happen in the United States, anywhere from the NSA program to civil liberties violations to the national debt to foreign policy. We're all about being activists on campus and bringing awareness to students on things that do happen. And we've had a guy dress up as an NSA agent and ask students, like, can we read your email? Can we listen into your phone conversation? Just for them to be aware of such programs that happen in the United States. And right now we don't really have meetings. I'm trying to figure out a time that's best for everybody to have meetings, but there is a conference coming up in Cincinnati on April 11th. It's free to attend, and food will be provided, and there will be speakers there. So
our next meeting will be on Thursday, the 9th of April, in MC 302.
Well, guys, thank you so much for coming out and talking with us today. I really appreciate it. It's been really educational for myself, from both of your perspectives, and I hope maybe you guys learned something today out there watching about socialism, and also a little bit about libertarian politics and also economics. And if you guys, if you want to check out either of these guys' Facebook pages, we'll include links below. Also, we gave you some events if you want to check out what these groups are all about, and if you want to learn yourself some more about how you can get involved here on campus at Cleveland State.